On July 22, 1978, in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, Swami Yogisharananda Saraswati and I rode a bicycle rickshaw throughout the bustling streets of Hoshiarpur in hopes of finding the Bhrigu.mp4, reported to be the oldest astrological treatise in India and said to contain intimate details about the lives of those who are destined to receive a reading from its ancient leaves. We were met on the way by Pandit Bhagat Ram Kamal, who later would become established as a spiritual master in the lineage of Baba Fakir Chand, the famous unknowing sage. As we were navigating past the various shops along the way, Swami explained to me the mythological legend behind the book's origination. Millenniums ago, during an untraceable time in India's history, the renowned sage Bhrigu reigned as the world's greatest astrologer. His mastery of astrology was so profound that he was able to dictate certain parts of the Akashic records from the astral worlds onto special scrolls into the sacred language of Sanskrit, often called by Indian mystics the language of the gods. This primordial translation was said to contain the record of every human being who ever lived on earth. During each age, the work has been transferred onto new leaves in order to preserve it for future generations. The present manuscript is said to be an exact copy of the original and is itself 400 to 500 years old. According to Hindu mythology, Bhrigu was the son of the sage Varun. It is said that once Bhrigu visited Lord Vishnu when the latter was sleeping with his consort Lakshmi. As Bhrigu was not accorded a proper welcome by Vishnu, the former felt annoyed and he hit Lord Vishnu. This act of Bhrigu was intolerable to the wife of Lord Vishnu. She became angry with Bhrigu and cursed him. "You and your entire Brahmin generation shall ever live a life of poverty, and Lakshmi shall remain very far away from such Brahmins." Bhrigu repented for his deed and pleaded for mercy to goddess Lakshmi. Ultimately, the goddess took mercy upon Bhrigu and told him to write the book Bhrigu.mp4, an astrological book, to earn his own livelihood and a livelihood for his generation, since it was not possible for her to withdraw the curse. Where and when this book was written by Bhrigu has not yet been precisely ascertained. The original Bhrigu.mp4 has not yet been traced. It appears some parts of it are owned by Brahmin families in Benares, Pune, and Meerut. But I was told by Yogeshwar and by others also that this work in Hoshiarpur is the only one of its kind now in existence in India. Paul Brunton, one of the first Western seekers to meet Ramana Maharshi and Anand Sarup of Dialbag, knew of its existence in the early 1930s. In his famous book, A Search in Secret India, Brunton repeats a revealing conversation he had with an accomplished astrologer about the works of Bhrigu. "Do you know if there is any English translation of the book?" Brunton asked the astrologer. The astrologer shook his head. "I've never heard of one. Few even are the Hindus who know of its existence. Hitherto it has been kept secret." Not being much interested in astrology, and doubtful of its exactitude as a science, I admit that I took the legend with good doses of skepticism. The only propelling force in its favor was my confidence and trust in the Swami and the scholar. Yogeshwar was a Christian monk extremely knowledgeable in Western science. The scholar was an expert in the philosophical systems of India. Their unremitting belief in the book's validity, which they claim resulted from their own experiences with its awesome accuracy, deeply impressed me. I attempted to keep an open mind. When we finally arrived at the library, which was sandwiched between two back streets, I was immediately struck by the large array of Sanskrit leaves tied in huge bundles. I had imagined that there would be one large book. Two librarians, who were also expert astrologers, were on duty. Apparently this valuable treasure had been a family possession for years. I found them intelligent, matter-of-fact, and fluent in English. We enjoyed some chai as we discussed some of the implications of the work. Among the innumerable papers, one particular leaf would be found which contains the details of my life, I was told. A pictograph was made by the astrologers using the date of my arrival at the Bhrigu.mp4, as well as my birth date and birthplace. I got the impression that the most vital event was my arrival at the library. This event set all other facts into motion. Using the pictograph based upon my life, the astrologers were able to rifle through huge stacks looking for a leaf which had the same chart drawing. This precise matchup, supposedly written by the sage Bhrigu thousands of years ago, gives in Sanskrit a description of me or any other person who had arrived and whose pictograph has been computed. Everyone got involved. Several bundles were taken down from the shelf at random and untied. The two astrologers, the Swami and the scholar, got busy looking for the corresponding chart. I began to feel it was a fruitless task. However, after 15 or 20 minutes, it was found. This, I was told later, was unusually quick. It added to everyone's sense of anticipation. The two librarians and Swami Yogeshwar examined it closely, and all agreed it was an exact replica. This parched Sanskrit scroll would have the information on my life. Examining the leaf carefully, I could not help feeling an odd sense of providence. While the astrologers read through it, Swami Yogeshwar and the scholar translated its message into English. It was obvious, at least to those of us present, that this seemed to be the real deal. The first line said, and I quote, "A young man has come from a far-off land across the sea. His name is David Lane, and he has come with a Pandit and a Swami." I stopped the reading in mid-sentence and asked for an explanation as to how my name could be mentioned. Swami Yogeshwar showed me the leaf on which my name was written in Sanskrit and pointed out that the pronunciation was almost exactly the same. The scholar, although familiar with the Bhrigu-Samhita, was also most impressed with its exactitude. But the astrologers accepted it as a common occurrence and read on. "This young man is here to study Dharma, or religion, and meet with holy men and saints." Certain things of a personal nature were related which I found very touching. Details of my present life were given, and there followed a description of my past lives. Swami Yogeshwar wrote down the Sanskrit and partially translated it for me on a scrap of paper. But to my surprise, I was told I could keep the original leaf if I wished. It was then I heard this amazing statement about the book from the astrologer's lips. The Bhrigu-Samhita replenishes itself, and with sometimes very old leaf and sometimes less aged. We do nothing. There is no need to. The astral records manifest physically at the appropriate time and place. The Swami acted as if there had been a revelation. Indeed, his own words to me were, "God has spoken to us today, dear friend, through the agency of the Bhrigu-Samhita." I gave my copy of the leaf to Swami Yogeshwar for safekeeping as I was taking a bus trip to the Sikh Golden Temple in Amritsar, a number of miles away, and I didn't want to damage it. My hope was to do some testing on it when I went back to Berkeley. But alas, my trip to India was cut short due to getting severely sick, and I couldn't make it back to the Punjab to retrieve the life reading. Interestingly, I was told several years later that Swami had died, and that the leaf was lost among his possessions. In 1981, I went back to the Bhrigu-Samhita with Professor Bhagat Ram Kamal. But alas, this time the astrologers could find no records concerning me or the scholar. I have never gone back. Not surprisingly, given the unremitting interest in astrology, my article on the Bhrigu-Samhita has proven to be the most popular one I have ever written. I must confess, though, I did not write the article as a believer in the book. In fact, I thought so little of its authenticity that I did not write about it for some 3 years after my first trip to India in 1978. It now appears to me that the book is a fraud. I say this precisely because the work almost invariably mentions how a previous sin, committed in a previous life, can be corrected if someone donates a specific sum of money to the astrologers. Moreover, the astrologers have never tested their records scientifically. My hunch now is that something a bit more earthly is happening in Hoshiarpur. The astrologers, I assume, are writing their own horoscopes, with the guidance perhaps of the Bhrigu records, to chart out the lives of those who come to them. I realize that I do not have proof that the book is a fraud. It is just that in light of Occam's razor and Hume's maxim, and my own seasoned understanding of Indian astrology, I suspect that economics, and not the Akashic records on the astral plane, are the driving imperative behind the astrologers' curious leaves. However, other thinkers do not share my skepticism. Perhaps the most prominent champion of astrology is the Nobel Prize winner, Kary Mullis. As Kary Mullis explains it, when I published Dancing Naked in the Minefield, there was one 11-page chapter where I mentioned that although astrology had been abandoned by scientific disciplines, it had not been scientifically dispensed with, meaning it hadn't been disproven as a self-consistent set of observations relevant to the human psyche. Not knowing at that time that Gunther Sachs, a Swiss citizen, had published such a study, I offered my own cursory examination from Who's Who in America. When I received a copy of the astrology file, I was intrigued. Mr. Sachs' book describes a study of a limited but essential part of astrology. Where was the sun when you were born? And what do you do for a living? The observation is that something unexplainable but clearly observable is going on, to a level of certainty that would be acceptable for a paper in a scientific journal. There is a clear connection whether you or I like it or not.
That really interests you?
Well, I had a very interesting experience in 1978. I was invited by a scholar to go to a very ancient text. It's considered to be the world's oldest astrological book in the Punjab. And I went there and subsequently found that there's a legend that says that this particular book was written 4,000 years ago. We don't know if it's a myth or if it's real or not. And supposedly has the name and the details of a person's life whoever would visit this library. And so I happened to go in there in 1978, and supposedly, the story goes, they found this ancient Sanskrit leaf that had my name on it.
David Christopher Lane?
So David Christopher Lane has come from an island across the sea named California, and he's come to research, saints and gurus of northern India. Now the problem, however, in such a case is that unless you do testing on that piece of paper, you're not going to be sure if it's valid or not. And so that caused quite a stir because I wrote an article about it in 1981, and everybody wants to go to northern India.
To know that was happening.
It's a very strange occurrence. I can tell you that the library is very hard to get to, and there's a legend in India that only certain select individuals can get to that library. And when they get there, supposedly what they'll do is they'll do an astrological charting to find where your leaf is. And the room has got Sanskrit leaves all over the place. And so after about 25 minutes, they found this leaf, this ancient Sanskrit piece of paper. And everybody's looking, they're all expecting something. And I didn't believe in astrology, and I still don't in a sense. But what happened was very unusual. They got the leaf, and all of a sudden, you can see it's in Sanskrit. And I could read a little Sanskrit myself, and the friend I was with is a Sanskrit scholar. And it said my name, said where I came from, said why I was there, and they said, you can keep the leaf if you want. So I kept the leaf, I gave it to my friend, the Swami Yogeshwar, and I said, you make a translation of it, I'll be back in 3 weeks. Subsequently, however, I got amoebic dysentery and had to leave India early. Well, Swami Yogeshwar died, and that leaf has now disappeared.
No.
So we don't know what to do with it, so it's a very strange.
David.